My name is Donnie Gadberry. It is May 15th, 2023. We're here to talk about the All Glades County motion and our transportation theme. What is your name?
Okay, my name is Wayne York. I live in Jackson Center, adjoining county. Actually was a resident here in Wapakoneta for over 30 years. And always been interested in railroads and railroad history ever since high school. And so I'll try to help with the firm to fill in some information about transportation here in Wabash County.
Okay, how did you become interested in railroads?
My family had a little mom and pop truck stop over on US 127, close to Greenville, Ohio. And once a month, my father would have to go up to the refinery at Lima. We had a Texaco station, and there was a Texaco terminal there, and we picked up, I don't know, cans of oil and all kinds of, tires and batteries and accessories and things like that we see at the truck stop. So when we were in Lima, it's about once a month, and I'd go along with them. We would go look around the railroads of Lima. Okay, we drive around, we visit the railroad yards, go past the old locomotive works. That's at the south. That was at the south end of Lima, and so my interest got started there. And then a Lionel train at Christmas, and it grew from that point. So I was starting to collect my first couple lanterns before I was out of high school. So.
Okay. How did the railroads affect development in All Glades County?
To a great degree. The first form of transportation outside of horses and mules was the canal system, built in the 1820s in the western part of Wabash County. It wasn't 20 years later that the first railroad, steam-powered railroad, was built from Cincinnati to Toledo, and that passed through Watkins and Wapakoneta and Craigersville, Lima, and on north of Toledo. And so inside of 20 years, the canals, they prospered for 20 years, and the railroads really cut their legs out from underneath them. They could move goods so much cheaper on a per ton basis. So for any farmers that was trying to get hogs or grain, corn, anything to market, the railroad was the way to go. So the canals were still around until early in the 20th century, but they were already a shadow of what they had been in the 1820s. So yeah, 1850s is when the first railroad was built through here, early 1850s. So we're before the Civil War. So this is really still pretty early.
Yeah. How can we interest more people in railroads and railroad history?
Well, we have different folks that try to present some things. I do some things like this. There's another fellow that grew up in New Knoxville. He'll do public presentations. I help with the railroad exhibit that's in Lima, and we try to have at least one open house a year of full-size original equipment that's located there close to Lima Memorial Hospital, east end of Lima. So yeah, that's a big focus. I'm helping to work on take some historic railroad films of Lima and this area and get them available in a digital format. Hopefully by the end of this year I'll have that going. There was, what happened is the museum in Lima, they had 16mm films of the old Lima Locomotive Works and what they were building there, and they've never seen the light of day. They've been shown live with a 16mm projector a few times, but there's nothing that's available. And some of them are wonderful films. So that would help give a real good idea of what was going on in the railroad world. And there's also a side branch to that. The Lima Locomotive Works also started building shovels and cranes during the 1930s. Then during World War II, massive effort to fight the Axis powers involved that actually, the Lima Locomotive Works up a division, they called it the Armory, and they started building army tanks. And I don't remember the exact count, but it was hundreds and hundreds of army tanks were built up here at Lima at that time. So, this really broadens real quickly. And of course, we tend to forget today, we're all busy with our cell phones, or all of our other digital devices, our interstate highways and things like that, and we forget that there was a time, not even 60 years ago, when most of the commerce in the United States was revolved around the railroads. I mean, it was to a high degree, like 90% of all troop movements and war material during World War II and all civilian passengers traffic was moved by rail. It was universal. That's how packages got delivered. I have a little item here I brought along. We think of UPS today and FedEx as the way to get packages to where they need to go. But at one time, this was it. The railroads went together, created a parcel service, and it all traveled by train. The packages were collected at the local railroad depot. They were put on the next baggage car. Train passed through, and then it went to the network that went all over North America. That included Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. And it was dominant. It was almost the only way to get packages anywhere outside of the U.S. Postal Service. And by the way, the mail traveled by railroad also. Almost all of our mail, any distance, was traveled by rail. That's how it got from here to California or wherever you wanted to send a letter. Railroads dominated the commerce of the United States for roughly 100 years. And it's still an important factor in the freight world, but yeah, it completely dominated all of that, and passenger traffic as well. So.
Why did Lima Locomotive go out of the business?
Lima was the #3 commercial builder of steam locomotives in the United States. They were the best innovator, but as a corporate strategy, they were wedded to the steam locomotive. Meanwhile, right before World War II, diesel locomotives were invented in Chicago by what later became a division of General Motors Company. And that started to take traffic away. Now, it was railroad by railroad in certain applications, like going across New Mexico, Arizona, long distances involved, and they had to use tank car loads of water to get to their water towers along the route just to run their trains. Well, with the diesel locomotives, you didn't have to do that. And gradually it became economy, less labor cost. And Lima stayed with the steam locomotive. They still thought that was the best way to move trains, and they lost the battle. So they were done, they built their last steam locomotive in 1949. And in fact, that particular one is saved, and that's in the park in Lima right now. It's on public exhibit. This one here, number 779. There's an order of 10, and these ran on the Nickel Plate Railroad, which was Chicago to Buffalo, and they had a line that came through Lima and out to St. Louis. So these type of locomotives were very successful, but by then they lost economy of scale, and it became harder to get parts to maintain these. And since other railroads had quit using them, the parts cost went through the roof, and so the tide turned on steam locomotives. By the late 1950s, all of these were retired. These are all gone from commercial service. So there's a few still around for historic and educational stuff, and one of them is a sister locomotive of this. It's based over in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and it still runs, and it still does about 99% of what it did when it was brand new. But the commercial battle for steam versus diesel was lost over a period of about 10 to 12 years. And so Lima, they had fortuitously started to build shovels and cranes as a sideline. And that grew, and they kept building more. And really, when they quit building the steam engines, most of the skilled people were moved over to the shovel and crane division. And they stayed there until the early 1980s. By that time, Clark Equipment owned them, and they had other plants to build the same thing. And so as the economy moved, they consolidated their production elsewhere of shovels and cranes. So.
Explain the Interurban and how it differed from the regular railroad.
Okay, well, the best example is right behind me here. Interurban's electrically powered. These were invented about the turn of the century, 1900 or so. They spread like wildfire. They were clean. I won't say they were quiet, but they were certainly not as noisy as big steam locomotives and heavy passenger trains at the time. And in fact, they could do business on just one or two cars full of passengers. So essentially what they did was they tried to cherry pick the best routes along the mainline railroads and siphon off enough business to run that. The ones here through Auglaize County were built right around 1902, 1903. And there was a network even locally. I mean, it was, the main line came from Lima through Cridersville, through Wapak, straight south along 25A to Sydney and down to Dayton. That was part of a larger network that went as far as Toledo and Cincinnati. There was other interurban companies, they would partner together. And in fact, in a lot of cases, you could board one car and ride it all the way to Cincinnati or all the way to Toledo. One single car. You didn't have to change cars. And they were clean. They were, in a lot of ways, they were 100 years ahead of their time. In fact, some of the urban centers have developed variations on this. Yeah, they're modernized versions, but it's still essentially the same idea, electrically powered, rapid transit. So, we just don't have the traffic density around here to justify something like that. It has to be usually a metro area. But the automobile came along, real strong in the teens and the 20s, cut the legs out from under their business. And then the Depression came along in 1930, after 1930. And people at that point were trying to use their automobiles as the economy moved rather than pay a fare to them. So the most of the interurban railroads went broke and were abandoned during the 1930s. It was just a matter of how fast the Depression got them, okay? Finally put them out of business. There were still a few of those that continued, and some of them are still today, like up in from South Bend, Indiana, up into Chicago. Not Chicago. That's variation on this. There's a few other places in the United States like that too. So it's so odd because so many of the things that they offered was so far ahead of its time that it'd be of more use now. But as a nation, we're heavily invested in the automobile means, and so a lot of that's gone. So this Western Ohio Railway is the one that came through Wapakoneta. Now they had a branch, went from Wapak to St. Mary's, and then it forked. They had a branch that went south to Minster and Fort Laramie, dead-ended. Then there was a line that went from St. Mary's to Salina and dead-ended. There was a company had built over in Indiana, and they were coming towards Salina, but they never got past the Indiana state line. So there was a gap there of 10, 15 miles. That was going to be a through route directly to Indianapolis, but it never happened. Like I said, the automobile came along and cut into the potential business, and so it was interesting. I have here some schedules on this Western Ohio Railway. These offerings show, in the order of 6, 8, 10 cars a day that you could ride in any direction. So it was really something. So I have some items from that. I have a lantern. This is not it, but I have a lantern marked with their initials. Just a number of items I've collected over the years. So yeah, the electric was you might call it an overlay, okay, on top of the steam railroad system. Now the railroad system has contracted a lot in recent decades, especially in 1976. There was a big bankruptcy, and bankruptcy court allowed a lot of the unproductive railroad lines to be abandoned. So we're left basically with the main line, which is still the original from the 1850s, from Toledo to Cincinnati, is still a major artery of freight traffic. And then we have a secondary line which runs from Lima to St. Mary's, over to Coldwater, and it stops just before you get to the Indiana line. It used to continue to Muncie and on to Indianapolis. But that's still along, that's a secondary basis. The last of passenger trains on the line through Wapak was 1971. In fact, I was able to ride one of the very last trains that ran. I have of all things, I went down to Troy, Ohio with a railroad buddy. We got on at Troy and we rode to Lima, got off, and then we caught the southbound equivalent, okay, as two trains that day would do this. And we got off in Lima, caught the southbound, and then rode it back. At that time, north of Piqua, Interstate 75 and the B&O Railroad run side by side for 3 miles, 4 miles, something like that. And I tell you, even there in 1971, when they pulled the throttle out on that, we were leaving the cars behind on I-75. So it still was a 70 mile an hour plus. I think it was actually legal for 79 mile an hour. We were actually leaving traffic behind on the parallel I-75. So that service is largely retracted. There's some faster trains. Government run agency operates those across northern Ohio through Cincinnati to Washington, D.C. But most of the rest of Ohio is devoid of regular passenger trains.
Many people these days have never ridden on on a train. How do we give more people the chance to do this?
Well, there are some regular scheduled trains that operate that you can run. There's the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad, which runs in the Cuyahoga Valley, which is a national park just south of Cleveland. They have a corridor between Cleveland and Akron you can ride. That's available pretty much daily, especially during the summer. There's another line short out of Lebanon, Ohio, which is south of us here. And that's, I think they operate about 10 miles. And it's pretty slow. My favorite is one that I'm involved with, over in Angola, Indiana. The sister to this locomotive that's still operational. I've been involved with this for 50 years. It runs about a dozen weekends this year around Angola, Indiana. And it runs, the track is good for 30 mile an hour. And I mean, it's still a show. We're running about a 10 car passenger train. It's a real good approximation the way it used to be till say 1950s. Okay, it's a good approximation of what train service behind steam locomotives was in the 1950s. And by the way, I see on my stack here, here's a photograph of the B&O's streamlined passenger train. Now it's a steam locomotive, but it was streamlined right after World War II and it wound up, assigned between Cincinnati and Detroit. And, this is exactly what it looked like. It ran till, 1957, through Wapak.
Is that it there? Is that in that county?
Not exact, it's the same setup, but it is not actually the same place. The background here in Wapakoneta, that's this picture here, is in Wapakoneta. We have commercial buildings back here, and of course, this is trees. So this is somewhere along the same route, but it's southbound because of the sun, you can tell by the sun. And the water column is on the east side here in Wapakoneta. This one's sitting on the west side. There's a good chance this is up at Deshler, Ohio, but that's on that same route, and the train would be in Wapak an hour later, or half hour later, or something like that. So that's a good sampling, and that was one of the nicer streamlined designs that the railroads used. Art Deco influenced the railroads heavily in the 20s, 30s, 40s, even in the 50s. Art Deco affected everything. I mean, the uniforms, not this, but the uniforms that lounge car attendants wore were really Art Deco styled. Tickets, paperwork, advertising, even a lot of the locomotives are streamlined. A lot of them had fancy, colorful paint schemes. So I'm kind of an Art Deco fan too, independently of railroads. I mean, yes, it overlaps a lot, but I'm still interested in Art Deco per se. So that's a little bit.
What is the future of the railroad, especially in Auglaize County?
Well, it's clearly that the original route from Toledo to Cincinnati is still an important artery. I don't see that diminishing any. They run, I don't know what the tonnage is, it's gotta be something like 20 million ton miles per year through here. And I don't see that decreasing. It's on a main line that extends all the way to Atlanta, okay? That's a corridor from Atlanta, all the way to Cincinnati and north to Detroit. So that's an important artery. Automobile traffic, automobile parts. I don't see anything changing there. The line through St. Mary's and Salina is is iffy. It's got enough to keep going, but it's certainly not flourishing like this line here.
What would you say is your greatest accomplishment in preserving railroad history?
It's the locomotive at Fort Wayne that runs, I was telling you about, that operates out of Angola. That's clearly the number one. We've hauled tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands of miles since 1979. That locomotive has operated special trains as far as New Jersey, Wisconsin, New York State, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, St. Louis, St. Charles, Missouri. So that's clearly my biggest interest and the most satisfying thing I've done. I'm age 71 now, so it gives you some human scale of that. The secondary is helping with the Lincoln Park Railroad exhibit at Lima. I'm on their advisory board, and I'm the only one that's ever done hands-on work on railroad equipment. Now, I didn't do it for a living. My career was as a city engineer, city manager here in Wapakoneta, village manager. I also ran a packaging plant for 10 years at the south end of Wapak, and 1 year as a railroad museum director in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Okay, so, and Rachel helped me find that, as a matter of fact. So that was, that's some of the things I've done, but I never have done railroading for a living. They got horrible work schedules. It's a 24/7 operation, and it's a way of life of its own, and you're gonna miss children in their sporting events and school activities if you work on a railroad. That's a large degree. Most folks work on a railroad have really difficult work schedules. So
What do you think still needs to be done?
I think the locomotive in Lima, it's under a shelter. It's got a roof over it and a roof on the west side. The rest of it's chain link fence. But I still find where raccoons get in there, crawl around, do their dirty work on the locomotive, different places, birds. Long-term, now this locomotive was built in 49. It ran for 9 years, retired in 1958. It's been in that shelter in Lima since 1966. And long-term, it needs to be inside where there's, just humidity control would take care of the problem. It doesn't need heat. If you just had a humidity control and the building's insulated, it'll be preserved indefinitely. There's also an 1882 wooden caboose displayed with it, and an 1883 wooden private car for the railroad officials. And of course, it comes from a different world. Beautiful woodwork. All that equipment should be indoors somehow. I'm working with a group in Lima, or we're scheming up a way to possibly do that. I'm hoping that it gets somewhere. The locomotive at Fort Wayne, it's got a heated, pre-engineered metal building, concrete floor. It's insulated. It's got heat, so it's preserved for when it no longer can run again. Like when the insurance thing or railroad rules and stuff get too complicated, it'll be fine in that building where it'll be preserved. But the one at Lima is a concern to me. So,
How has the accident in East Palestine harmed the reputation of trains?
It was okay, I talked to some railroad insiders on this, and that's, for the record, this was early this year, East Palestine, Ohio. There was a hazardous chemicals wreck. And what I seem to be able to find from everybody I know is that it's just a perfect combination of the wrong things happening at the same time. It is. Any of these things theoretically could happen, but you just had a number of things all occurred at the same time, and this was it. The equipment to check hot boxes, okay, with the bearings, the bearings here on these axles, it keeps it below a certain temperature. Okay, there's line sign scanners like every 25 miles, and they detect anything that's hot above a certain level. Well, they kept finding they were stopping the trains, checking things, and then there was never anything wrong. So they adjusted the discriminator up a little bit for another 5 degrees or 10 degrees. No problem. They still had more unnecessary stops than they wanted to deal with. So they crank up the discriminator a little more. And this is the same thing that you'll have in military, Air Force bombing runs, things like this, okay? Radar. They have these discriminators that you can adjust at what level you can pick up birds, okay? You can set radar where you can detect birds. Well, they don't want to deal with birds. So they just turn the discriminator up a little bit, okay? Adjust it up a little higher. And filter out the birds and just look for the bad stuff like enemy aircraft or missiles or things like that. So this is the same thing. It was just I won't say a comedy of errors, but it was certainly a confluence of bad things and Murphy's Law all combined into one. So there's lots of railroad derailments all the time, and nobody ever pays the attention to them. There's minimal damage. There's very few people that were hurt, but yet there's always a chance when you have a tank car with 15,000 gallons of hazardous chemical. There's always a chance. There's double wall tank cars, okay? So even if a piece of rail is sticking up and managed to perforate the outside wall, you still got the inside wall. Well, this is just everything went wrong at the same time. And according to Murphy's Law, everything like that, sooner or later, everything like that will happen.
So do you have anything that you would like to add?
Oh, if you have a couple of weeks here, I could add to it. But that's a lot of the highlights, and that's a good picture of what took place here in the Auglaize County and Lima area. And good view of the conventional pasture trains, as well as the electric interurban system, all big parts of our history.
Could you tell me a little bit about the stuff that you brought in?
Sure. Got a couple things here. When the locomotives were built at Lima, they put a brass plate on them. Usually be mounted on the side of the boiler right up near the front. And they proudly proclaimed, that they built this locomotive on such and such a date, this is the serial number, and this is where it was at. And they got to where they had to start putting USA on it after the name. It used to be Lima, Ohio only. But then they started doing more and more exports, especially like right after World War II. They built hundreds of locomotives that were shipped over to Europe and England, and places that were being rebuilt under the Marshall Plan. So these are prize collectors items. There was Baldwin Locomotive Works had a circular plate with the same information. The American Locomotive Company is connected in New York. Theirs was a big rectangle. So Lima's was a diamond. It was distinctive. So I had some of those. This is a Pennsylvania Railroad trainman's cap, and it didn't fit my head. Maybe it fits your head. My head's too big. On the track switches along the railroads, there'd be sidings for different industries and some of their own side tracks. This was the routine for those. You would normally have a steel or a brass lock and a brass switch key. And normally they had a hollow barrel, which was, I won't say it wasn't exclusive to railroads, but they were the biggest user of hollow barrel keys. And a different keying pattern, and these were assigned to employees that were working in train service. And it usually had the railroad initial. Sometimes it even had a number stamped on the back where it was assigned to Donnie or somebody else. And they were responsible not to lose it, and if they did, they had to pay for it, And of course, the lock would snap shut, okay, like so. And it had railroad initials stamped on it too. So this was standard fare to operate trains. Here's a mystery item, but all I have to do is put it up against the wall and they'll figure out what it is. It's a code hook. But it was not just a functional code hook. I mean, this thing was elaborate, and this is, and by best of my determination, this is nickel-plated brass, okay? Just beautiful pieces of work. So much of the railroad stuff at that time, it was the leading industry in the United States. And
Is that in a train or in a depot?
this was in a passenger car. This had been in a wooden passenger car built before World War I. Okay, they changed to steel cars right around that time frame, about World War I. But this was an early one, and I mean, this was the finest. Everything inside these passenger cars was, and including the dining car and food, it was as good as you could get at the finest restaurants in the country. Okay, that was the service level that was established. Here's a ticket punch. Give me your paper, please. This is a standard ticket punch. It's stamped for the Pullman Company, which provided sleeping car service for all the railroads in the United States, almost all. And it's very simple. Now this is a simple circle, but a lot of them had different patterns. There would be clover leaves, there'd be triangles, there'd be zigzags, all kinds of patterns, so you know which conductor punched that ticket. Okay. There was always a count, so I always had to keep track of stuff like that. And my favorite mystery item is like, what in the world is this? Okay, well this is a berth key. Sleeping cars would have an upper berth that would fold up out of the way during the daytime. At nighttime, you want to lower it to horizontal level, and then there would be an upper berth and a lower one. Sofas on the bottom at the floor level, those would convert into a bed for nighttime, and this was the key to unlock that upper berth. And it was a unique pattern, and it was not used on anything else. So, and there's no other markings. There's no railroad initials on these. I don't think I've ever seen one with railroad initials. Sometimes one of the makers would have their name on it, but that's it. And these silly little things will sell for $50 to $100 each. So, and I've got about 4 different kinds. So I'm always on the lookout, collector mentality, always on the lookout for different variations. So that's some of the items. And the lantern. Now, this is he's used a standard issue. This style was used starting about World War I until electric battery lights came into use, 1960s, all right? It was real simple. There was, you use a kerosene burner, and you have, yeah, so this was the kerosene burner. You light it up, and it put out a shockingly small amount of light, okay? But if it's pitch black out, it's something, okay? So you'd adjust the wick with this, and light it up, where kerosene would fuel it. Then there was about 5 different colors of globes. Clear would be just for utility, for, you know, to see where you're going, to see what you're doing. But if you're gonna signal trains, this one here was a blue globe. This was called a blue flag. Daytime, it had a cloth flag, blue cloth on it. It indicated that somebody was working on the train, underneath it, and they were in harm's way. So you didn't dare move any equipment that had a blue lamp or a blue flag on it, okay? You're gonna kill you're gonna kill or injure somebody if you did. So, red was used for general signaling, and then there's amber. It had certain uses, certain times. Most common was clear and red. And then this baby here wasn't used near as much, but in a way it was as important as anything. So that's the routine. These were used. There was still some in use. I saw some in use over at Salina in about when I was going to college over there, about 1969, 1970. That was the tail end of that. For the most part, they were already using battery flash lamps. Not really a flashlight per se, but a battery lamp. So, and they would typically be marked with the initials of the railroad. And this was the nickel plate, which is the one that went through Buckland, St. Mary's, and down that way, over to Salina. Let's see, there was about 3 primary producers after World War II, but before that, it was like anything else. There was a couple dozen manufacturers. And of course, over time, you know, they got filtered out, and the strong ones that made the best product, best price, those won out. This is galvanized. This is galvanized steel. Before 1900, these were all brass. And I've got one of those that dates back right after the Civil War. And it was nickel plated, made for the Pullman Company. And they were like this, okay? They were way fancier than they were needed just for utilitarian purposes. So yeah, so I've been an active collector since high school, and I'm kind of going the other way now, but pretty much I'm concentrating mostly on photographs, paperwork, things of this nature. Big stuff, I've had station name signs that were as long as that chalkboard there, like 10 foot long. Some were even longer than that. They'd have the name of the town. And so I collect a lot of those. Some of those are cast iron. I mean, it took 2 people to carry them around. A lot of them were wood, some were metal. So I've been active in a lot of that kind of stuff. My collection of locks and keys is measured into dozens. I've probably had over 100 lanterns. I'm probably down to about 2 dozen of my favorite ones, the most important or significant or interesting or something like that. So mostly Indiana, Ohio railroads, but I got a few from out west. If the lantern itself was interesting, or a really obscure railroad, okay? Those are always, any collectors, I don't care if you collect stamps or whatever, you want the obscure, the oddballs, and I even have one of these that was a stamping error. Now this says NKP, which meant Nickel Plate Road. I have one, it was a stamping error, and it was KNP. And I've already went through the official guide of railroads, and there was no such railroad ever existed. And just in the last year, I found another fellow that's got another one, it's the same one, when they stamped this out with the wrong, with K and P on them. He got one, so I don't know if there was a couple dozen or 100 or what, but just like stamp collectors, man, there's nothing, or coin collectors, there's nothing better than an error, you know? So that's a little bit. Okay, got anything else, Donnie?
No, that's it, thank you.
All right, very good, happy to share with you.